If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. What's the creepiest thing you've experienced that no one else would believe? Walking home in the middle of the night, had to cross this patch of road that dipped into a valley with no light or sidewalks. I was walking on the right side of the road, which was lined with tall brush. As I'm walking, I hear some rustling, like something was moving around in the brush. What I see is what appears to be a humanoid creature, pale white, hunched over, facing away from me. I could see the bones of its spine sticking out from its stretched out skin. Dude, I was so shook I sprinted a good half-mile uphill. Funny enough, a few nights after I had to cross the same valley. I ended up running down the middle of the road and a cop stopped me up the road. He asked me why I was running and I straight up told him that spot is creepy. No questions asked, let me go. I think he knew too. I farm in a rural town in the western US, and our farm is a ways out of town, so naturally, it's pretty eerie at night. We flood irrigate, so the water needs to be moved from field to field, and those water changes just come whenever the fields are finished. At each end of our farm, there is a big row of trees that once again get kind of eerie at night. So my dad and I were driving down our farm road at around 3 a.m. We reached the row of trees, and as the headlights hit the trees, I saw a strange figure. It looked to be in the rough shape of a human, but not quite the same. Taller and more hunched over. Kind of like a 6'3" woman in a shawl. I only saw it for maybe 2 or 3 seconds, but it was long enough to make my blood run cold. I was so freaked out that I didn't say anything to my dad. About 30 seconds later, my dad started driving faster and looked over at me and said, "I wasn't going to say anything, but did you happen to see a strange figure walk between the trees?" I nodded, and we changed the water and went home. There has been a local legend about a creature that looks like what we saw that has been talked about since the 1940s. It's supposed to be similar to a Native American skinwalker. And it would make sense to me. We have found Indian pottery and arrowheads all over our farm. Neither of us have seen it again, but it is still in the back of my mind when I drive to that corner of the farm. My dad had shit going on in his house, so much shit that almost every kid who would come in, myself, my sisters, my brother and my dad have all had multiple experiences in there. I remember one time, I was going upstairs to have a shower. The bathroom was the end of the hallway, and on the way to it, I had to pass by the room I shared with my sisters when I was over for the weekends. As I passed by, I seen something sit up on the bottom bunk. We had bunk beds in there, out of the corner of my eye. This thing looked like a little girl. She had pale skin, short black hair that was cut in a bob style with straight bangs covering her forehead, and her eyes were these massive circles with large black dots in the center for pupils. She was facing sideways, so her right shoulder was facing me when she turned her head. The other half of her body looked like it was under the blankets. I remember getting such an intense feeling of fear that I went back downstairs and refused to go upstairs at all or even sleep in the house. My dad had to set up the camping tent in the backyard for the rest of the weekend. Phantom hitchhiker. When I was 21-ish, I worked in a remote area that was a 40-minute commute one way. I also worked a lot of nights. I saw the hitchhiker 3 times, in the same spot, wearing the same clothes. He was a middle-aged Latino in a maroon shirt, a plaid jacket, and a red baseball hat. At first I thought he was a dairy worker. There were a couple nearby, but nearby was still 3 miles. That wasn't even taking into consideration that he was wearing a heavy coat in the middle of summer. I kept driving. I saw him again months later, same clothes, same spot, thumb out. I actually got a better look this time because it was winter and raining so hard my wiper blades could barely keep up, but he didn't seem to see me. He was looking down the road past me. Anybody standing in the rain coming down that hard would have been soaked, but he wasn't. The final time was shortly before I quit that job. It was early summer, and my hours had changed slightly, so when I saw him again, the sun was just starting to set. Then what I had suspected was confirmed. His shirt wasn't maroon like I thought. It was stained with blood. I passed by that spot twice a day. There were new crosses going up on that road all the time because it was flat and straight with nothing around except the odd dairy or cornfield for miles. It was known for being a bad stretch where lots of people died. I never noticed the cross where he stood because it had fallen over. When I left that job for the last time, I pulled over where he stood, found his cross, and propped it up again. It said Poppy. That was almost 20 years ago. I hope he finally gets picked up. A few years ago, I was camping for the first time with friends. We found a fantastic spot on a beach, which ended up being a nudist beach, but that's another story. We get set up and have a great time. I, however, made an error and drank a Coke Zero from the esky, IBS, sorbitol sets it off, not fun. At about 12 a.m., I wake up with the usual cramping. The closest toilet is a 500-meter walk through the bush and a 3-minute car ride away. It's pitch black, and I'm using my phone's screen light to get to the car. Unfortunately, it's on 10%, and the iPhone being an iPhone, the 10% lasted about 10 seconds. Try turning it back on, no cigar. I was about halfway through the walk when this happened. I freak. I stopped, realized I had lost the path, and crouched as I was a bit cold and thought through what I was going to do. In pain, I got up, tried to feel the path out, and kept walking. This is where it gets creepy and weird. I stopped. I crouched again, as I was still lost and the pain was far worse. And then get back up and keep walking. About 2 minutes later, I feel no ground under my front foot. And see the moon reflecting off the water as I'm falling to my death, as this was obviously the cliff about 10 meters from the path. I hit the water and rocks, then I'm suddenly back, crouched where I was about 2 minutes earlier. My hair was wet but my clothes were dry. I try my phone again, and suddenly it starts up. I waste no time using its light to find the path and rush to the car. After fixing myself up and even having a warm shower, the closest toilet was a caravan park. I went back to the car, drove back to the parking lot, and slept in the car. I definitely wasn't walking back after that experience. No one believed me, and to be honest, I'm not sure I believe me anymore. Maybe the pain made me pass out? I grew up in a house that originally served as an old folks' home. At night the whole house would pop and crack. It sounded like people were walking up and down the stairs all night. My mom was always on board that the house was haunted. My dad said it was just the house settling. The house in 1984 was 100 years old. One night I woke up to the sound of a door slamming. I walked down the hall and peeked around the corner, looking down the stairs. At the bottom of the stairs was a closet. The door was open about 6 to 8 inches, and there was a human face looking at me from inside the closet. I ran into the bathroom and tried to calm down. Finally I mustered the courage to come out of the bathroom and look down the stairs again. Nothing there. There were many experiences in that house that are harder to explain. When I was younger, maybe like 5. I went to bed and I woke up to the sound of something whispering and I thought nothing of it until I heard "Hey, PSST," and I looked up and saw a black dog with yellow eyes standing on 2 legs. I started screaming and crying and yelled for my parents, and when they came up the thing hid behind a chair in my room. I was so scared I slept with my parents for a week and never saw that thing again. I had multiple dreams about it though. It always had this power that it could make me freeze and not be able to move, and he would always do it in front of my parents and they never did anything. Really creepy shit. I lived in a haunted house for a year. At this time, it was just me and my 3 sisters. Ages 13, 5, and 2, I was 10, my older sister and I were home from school with a stomach bug. My mom had to go get my 5-year-old sister from school and asked us to watch our youngest sister. We were sitting in the living room, and she was eating some snacks and had a sippy cup of water. The top of the cup must have not been screwed on tight enough because when she knocked it over, water spilled everywhere. My older sister went to the kitchen to get some napkins to clean it up. When she came back, she handed me some of the napkins, and we both started cleaning. We were on our hands and knees wiping up the water when we started to hear banging coming from the 2nd floor. We both paused, looked at each other, and said nothing. But we both had that look of, "You heard that too, right?" We stayed silent and kept cleaning. Then again, another bang. At this point, we stand up and are still silent, just staring at the ceiling. Then came the giggles. We heard little kids upstairs laughing. Then the laughter turned to singing. It sounded like a children's choir singing. My sister scooped up the baby, and we ran outside. It was a clear day that day, but I remember once we got outside, it started to rain. We had no choice but to go back inside. We stayed on the front porch until my mom got home. We saw things in that house that I still have nightmares about, 20 years later. But for some reason, the giggling and singing bothered me the most. I used to babysit my niece and nephew when they were 4 and 5 while my sister went to work. She lived down the street from me, so I would walk down in the morning before she left and before the kids woke up. I got there one morning, and after she left, I laid down on the couch. I heard one of the kids run down the hall, and I immediately pretended to be asleep so they would go back to bed and not get the day started yet. I felt my niece run by me on the couch. Her running stomp shook the floor, and I could hear the trinkets on the shelves shake. And I felt the wind of her blow by me. Then it was quiet, but I knew she was still there. She leaned over my ear, moved my hair out of the way, and laughed in my ear. And I just thought of the audacity of this girl. And then she hid under the end table of the couch. Realizing she wasn't going to go back to bed until I woke up, I just got up and looked under the end table. There was no one there. Completely baffled at how she got up and out of the living room in literally 2 seconds without my hearing, she shook me. So I went down the hall to her room and started to freak out. My nephew was sound asleep in his bedroom, and when I got to my niece's room, she was sound asleep tucked under her covers. My heart almost fell out of my body. When I lived in Texas, there was this stormy night. Like an unusually strong storm. Plenty of lightning and thunder. I had a friend over. I remember playing Morrowind and OG Halo until super late. Well, late for a 13-year-old. I was lying awake, staring out the window, and listening to the rain. We had called it a night about an hour before this. There was a tree outside my window with a branch I would sometimes use to get in and out of my room. For, privacy reasons. And because my parents were nosy. In between some thunder, I saw something on the branch outside. A pair of eyes, large and yellow. They just appeared. Right where I was already staring. In a single instant, just there. A flash of light from the storm lit the tree up. It looked like ducking Gollum. From LOTR or some shit, gangly and grey with sharp as teeth. Long fingers that were holding something that was moving. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. Whatever the duck it was, it looked like it was eating something. Then he looked right at me and smiled. A far too human smile. I screamed bloody. Ducking. Murder. I woke up the whole damn house. Everyone told me to stop lying about stuff. You had too much caffeine before bed. Me and my friend downed 2 12-packs of soda between us. You were asleep, it was a nightmare. Bullshit. I have no idea if I was seeing things, if it was a trick of the light, or anything else it could have been. But I knew I was awake. It was during the summer, and I had been staying awake till sunup for over 2 weeks at that point. When I told my friend, he was skeptical, but he took my word for it. Our house was surrounded by 20 acres of woods, and we had both heard some strange noises in those woods. When the day broke and the storm let up, we went outside near my window. On the ground right under the branch were some half-eaten field mice and their tails. It has been 17 years since that day, and I still see it in my nightmares sometimes. When I think about what's out there in the dark, I remember Gollum. That's what I've called it ever since. When I was a teenager, I went on a hike in south-central Pennsylvania by myself in the Appalachian Mountains. It was a day I was playing hooky, so there was nobody else there at the small trail, at least that I could see. You had to drive there was no foot traffic. I was young and had been talking or singing and horsing around the whole time, totally unconcerned. Yelling things off the top of the mountain, etc. On my way down from the mountaintop, I heard my dad's voice call my name and ask for help. I thought I was having a stroke and stopped and almost started to follow, thinking, what is my dad doing here? Did he follow me or something? And then I came to my senses and told myself, my dad is sitting in his office, like an hour or more away. I heard it 2 more times in the space of a minute or two, call me by name and tell me to come here and help me. It sounded so insistent, like it was urgent, and it was without a doubt my father's voice. I have never run so ducking fast. I used to do this hike in bare feet, and I remember ducking my feet up while hurrying down the mountain. I never went back, and to this day, I don't know what the duck that was. I immediately drove to my dad's office, and he was sitting at his desk working. I don't remember if I told him what I experienced at the time or not. Look, I'm a super logical thinker. I call people who believe in ghosts, monsters, wendigos, etc. stupid. Sorry if you do. It just makes no sense to me how you could believe it. Or at least it didn't. I joined the army in January. I went to infantry OSSET, 1 station unit training, basic training, essentially, and the infantry loves going out into the field for long periods of time. Specifically in OSSET, they also love making you lose sleep during these field days or weeks. 1 week we're out in the field practicing platoon-size tactics. We pull 50% security every night, meaning from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., half of us are awake in hour-long shifts just staring into the darkness. These hour-long periods of scheduled sleep include the amount of time it takes to walk back to your sleep pad, take off your boots, actually fall asleep, then wake up 10 minutes early so you can be on time for your next shift. Essentially, we're all extremely sleep deprived. Around night 4, I saw something jumping between the trees. At this point, I'm so tired that I just think, oh man, drill sergeants are really going above and beyond to mess with us. But the next day, someone asks if anyone saw the big monkey thing in the trees. A few others said they saw someone running way faster than a human could in the bushes, and another couple of people in the same foxhole had a conversation with our lieutenant while that lieutenant was home and his car was gone. We're all convinced we saw a skinwalker that night. Another big part of this is that only on night 4 did anyone see anything, and the field was 7 days long. Everyone else sums it up as dumb privates with no sleep, but I definitely saw something. When we were young teenagers, we were all hanging out at a neighborhood friend's house when he decided it would be fun to pull out a Ouija board. We were all just stupid kids, ridiculously high at the time, so we really had no idea what we were doing with the board. We were sitting around the board in the living room, just being dumb and asking silly questions about ghosts, spirits, dead relatives, etc. Suddenly, this guy's dog, who is a big, old, morbidly fat mutt, jumps up, runs into the dining room, and starts snarling and barking ferociously at the light fixture hanging above the dining room table. There was nothing there. There was no upstairs in this house. This normally sedentary pig dog is just totally freaking out at a light fixture hanging from the ceiling. He then lets out a spine-tingling yell, like someone kicked him hard, and he spins around and runs out of the room, yelping the whole way through his exit. The group of us just sat there with our mouths hanging open, wondering what the hell we just saw. When reality crept back in, we whipped that board across the room and bolted out of that house like it was on fire. It was honestly like something out of a movie. Only this really happened. We all concurred later that this was not something we'd hallucinated due to the excessive bud we'd inhaled earlier. I live in the woods in Florida. I'm 13 miles from the nearest thing, and that's a gas station. I'm 25 miles from the nearest town, and my only neighbors for 2 miles are my parents, who live across the street from me. I'm a single mom. It's just me and my son out here, and our dogs. In my living room, I have a giant gray sectional couch in the shape of an L. My son, who was 6 when this happened, likes to pull up the ottoman, making the couch a giant bed area that he then piles all the blankets and pillows we own to make himself a camping nest and sleep out in the living room. Now that I've established some background information, the actual story. So I got home from work early-ish one night, and my son had built his nest on the couch and passed out early, like 8 p.m., so I had time to myself and a sleeping child, so I decided to play some Skyrim uninterrupted for once. I'm playing my game and smoking my bowl, I've got my medical card, and just having a great time when I hear my pit bull, Aries, bark. It's not a bunch of barking, just one insistent, "Hey mom, you left me out and I want to come and bark." Any pet owner should be nodding their head right now, we all know our pets' voices. I pause and look at the time, and I say out loud, "It's only 8:30, you're fine, it's a beautiful night out anyway," and go back to my game. About half an hour later, he barks again, just that one "Hey mom, you left me out here" bark. It interrupts my concentration, and I ignore the urge to get up and let him in. I continue playing because I don't get much time, working 50 hours a week and taking care of my kid and house when I'm not working. I'm mid a dungeon quest, and I'm concentrating hard, but about every 15 minutes I hear the one stupid bark, and I start to get really annoyed because every time he does it, I get the literal urge to go let him in, and it just tips me out of my train of thought and ruins my game immersion, and I'm starting to get angry. If I wanted to let you in, I'd let you in, but you're 5-ing. Finally, he does it that one last time. Most moms know what I mean. I had had enough, so I toss down my controller, thinking how stupid this dog is. As it hits the pile of covers next to me that my kid is buried in, I hear a snore, a dog snore, and I move the blanket to see Aries, dead asleep next to my kid, not a care in his dumb doggy brain. Immediate fear and dread and heaviness like I've never felt washed over me. I can't describe it any better than an ancient fear. It felt old and terrifying, and I literally heard a voice say in my head, "Don't move, baby, don't get up, just keep playing like you don't know anything is wrong and it will go away. If you take one step towards that door, you're in trouble." I picked my controller back up and kept playing. I heard the bark a few more times, but around 11:45, the air in my house felt normal again, and I slept out on the couch because I wasn't leaving my kid alone. So for me, we were out chilling and having a few beers by the river. It was getting dark out, so my friends and I wanted to head out before it was too dark to see the trail. On our way back, we saw something. Something that looked similar to a human. We, being worried about the person and if they were okay, went to shine the flashlight on the person, except there was no face. I didn't see the face because my friend was closer and I was a few feet away. My friend said it looked like static when I asked him about it. The person bolted. Went from a lying down position to a standing position faster than any human I've seen and ran off. It was tall, too. Like over 7 feet tall, if I had to guess. It was super dark out. The way it ran reminded me of something that was a cross between robotics and the way that the Bionic Man ran. It ran away faster and quieter than a human. All the hair on my body stood on end, similar to the feeling that you would get when a thunderstorm is out. Except that there were almost no clouds out. All of my friends and I were freaked out, and the hair on all of our arms was standing straight up. I've never had such a strong feeling of terror and dread before. When I was like 7, I was at my mother's friend's house with her. My mom's friend's name was Jenny. There's this hallway in her home with doors on the left, the right, and the end. We were all in the room on the left. This is the computer room. My mom and Jenny were surfing the web, and I was bored, so I went to see what was in the room at the end. Jenny is wearing all black. It'll make sense later. It's supposed to be a weight room with exercise equipment. I opened the door, and there, sitting on a machine facing the door, was Jenny. I was confused and wondered if she got past me. Perhaps I wasn't paying attention? But as my gaze turns upward, I see she's wearing all white, and her eyes are void. The deepest, blackest void of eyes. Though she was without pupils, it was clear she was staring at me. She was only 4 feet in front of me. I was frozen, too scared to move, knowing this wasn't right. I yell for my mom. While doing so, I turn my head for a split second in search of my mom, hoping to see her and Jenny coming for me. I turn back, and the thing is gone. It gives me chills down my spine because it's still so vivid and real when I look back on it. I'm not sure what it means or what to make of it. But I know I wasn't hallucinating. I have this habit of going to secluded cabins alone. I love it, despite how creepy it can get. A few months ago, my 2 closest friends and I headed up to an Airbnb in the middle of nowhere and spent the weekend eating edibles and reliving college jokes. In the middle of the night, I wandered down to the bathroom. This was an old, renovated A-frame, so the bathroom was in the back with a very small rectangular window directly across from the toilet. I flick the light on, start to pee, and hear a very distinct 4 knocks on the outside of the window. One of those rhythmic knocks is dum-da-da-dum. No light pollution means I can see nothing outside the window, but due to the light, they can see everything inside. I freeze and very carefully walk back up to the loft. Neither believed me, and I barely believed myself. Years ago, when I was around 10 or 11, I used to be part of the Boy Scouts. We went on a camping trip one day. There was a lake down the hill from our camping site, so naturally, myself and 2 friends decided to look around. None of us realized how quickly it turns from light to dark when the sun starts setting. My friends and I began to sprint back to the camp. I tripped several times after being left behind in the dark. I really needed glasses back then, and mixed with the darkness, I was left practically blind. I wandered in the general direction of the camp. I eventually saw a figure who looked to be about my age. They motioned in the direction of the camp. I began walking that way, and when I turned to say thanks, they were gone. I couldn't really make out their features due to the darkness, but I distinctly remember them looking paler than a human should. I don't know why I immediately trusted the figure, but I felt at ease around it. I know it wasn't a member of my group because they didn't have the uniforms we were wearing. I was camping at the lake with my family when I was probably around 7 years old, and my great-grandpa had been talking about finding turtle eggs on the beach, so I was super excited to find some eggs myself. So when I saw some sand at the base of a tree in our campsite that looked disturbed, I went digging in it to see what was there. Something that looked almost like a plant stem came out of the sand, opened up into a sort of pale, 4-leaved, spiky flower shape, and I swear it looked at me, and then it closed back up and sucked back down into the sand. It startled me half to death. It freaked me out, and I immediately went and described it to my mom as best I could. But of course, parents, she didn't believe me and told me I had an active imagination. I really wanted to go back and dig in the sand again to figure out what it was, but I was too weirded out, and I decided that if my mom didn't even know what it was, it could actually be dangerous. I kind of figured that since I was young and lacking in knowledge, one day I would come across the explanation for what I saw, but to this day, I'm still baffled. I've told this story here before a few times, hoping that someday someone will be able to tell me what the heck that thing was. Between the ages of 4 to 5, I can pinpoint it because of where I lived at the time. I also have a very good memory and can remember as far back as Christmas 1986. I was born at Christmas 1984. What I can only describe as a large orange ball used to visit me almost every day. In the morning, but I feel it's crucial to explain that it wasn't first thing in the morning, upon waking. I wasn't dreaming, I wasn't sleep drunk, etc. It wasn't some kind of imaginary friend. I was ducking terrified of it, and my childhood was happy and trauma-free. I wasn't blessed with a particularly active imagination. I've also never had any health, vision, or sensory problems. It was about the size of a beanbag seat, so rather big, but was spherical. It had a slightly fuzzy outline. Its exterior looked like it would feel like a piece of carpet if you touched it, not that I would have. It floated mid-air, around 1 foot off the ground. It just floated around the same spot, it didn't move around. It only ever appeared on the landing and nowhere else. It didn't speak or make any noise. It had eyes and a mouth, both were really cartoonish, but in a creepy way. It just grinned at me and didn't do anything else. It'd disappear after a couple of minutes. I'd open my bedroom door, and it'd be there. Terrified, I'd just peep at it until it eventually ducked off for the day. Nobody else ever saw it. If I called my mom, my brother, etc., it'd disappear. And of course, nobody believed me. One day, it just stopped coming for good. A group of friends and I enjoy exploring abandoned buildings, and being from Scotland, there are quite a few to choose from, most being old nursing homes, older hospitals, Victorian buildings, and old farm buildings. Most of them look and feel like the start of every horror movie you have ever watched, and it's very easy to spook yourself if you let your imagination wander and listen to all of the sounds of wind blowing through broken windows and floors creaking from the weather. It's not very often we encounter another person when we explore these buildings, as we are very careful about not disturbing buildings that may be occupied by homeless people or squatters, and we generally watch the building for 10 to 15 minutes before we enter to be sure we are alone. One evening we are in a large Victorian-era care home that was burned down in the 1960s, and we had heard reports on an urbexing forum of it being an insurance job, so the whole thing is a bit sketchy. It has 4 floors, the top one has had the flooring totally removed, and the bottom one is a basement where the staff used to live. We explored the ground floor and found some old tables set up with chairs, nothing too exciting, and it's starting to get dark. We walked to the top of the stairs leading to the basement, which consists of a long tunnel splitting off into rooms on each side. At the end of the tunnel is a young girl, maybe in her late teens, dressed in a t-shirt and jeans, who gives us a follow me gesture, then turns and runs into one of the rooms without a word. Instinctively, I wanted to follow, but something just felt totally wrong. She seemed far too calm, and, although it was dull, the only lights being from our shitty torches and holes in the brickwork above, she seemed to be smirking. We all noped the duck back up the stairs onto the first floor, and as I get to the top stair, I hear someone on the landing from the first floor shushing someone else pretty sternly. A very loud, shh, shh. We took off and jumped in the car, expecting people to chase after us, but we never saw anyone after that. We have been back a few times since, and it's always felt very creepy. There was one moment that will stick with me forever and that I get mixed reactions to when I tell the story. Let me start by adding some context. I was 20 at the time and was helping my girlfriend move from Alabama to Los Angeles. Because she had all her belongings in her car, we decided to drive. At that time, she had a suspended license, so I was the one who was forced to drive the whole way. Because I didn't want to get any speeding tickets, I brought my radar detector from home to take with us on the drive. Now it was the second day of our trip, and we had recently crossed into New Mexico. At the time, it was already well past sunset, so most of my drive that day was spent on the I-10 at night. Because I was the only driver, I made the decision to stop every couple of hours at rest stops to use the restroom, stretch, or eat. I remember stopping that night really late, at around 11 or 12, at a rest stop in Gage, New Mexico. From what I remember, the rest stop was really the only thing off the exit, and there was nothing as far as a town or homes in the area for miles. The only thing, there was a small area with many identical concrete structures covering picnic tables. They were like concrete boxes, 3-sided, with window cutouts and a light in the middle. As we were pulling in, the radar detector started going haywire, showing codes for multiple different bands, including X, Ka, and laser, all at once. I turned the radar detector off, not really thinking much of it at the time, and pulled into a picnic area near the back. From what I remembered, I was going to eat a snack or something to tide me over, and as I was grabbing the food from the middle row, I heard a low rumble or squeak as someone was rubbing their palm along the side of the car. As I was grabbing some items from a bag in my lap, my girlfriend at the time grabbed my arm with the most intense grip and fear and just started saying, we gotta go, with increasing panic. I'll never forget what I saw, to be honest. In her side mirror, there was a large, rough silhouette leaning against the car just past the back door. Even from a glance, I could tell that the figure had to be much taller than the SUV, as it looked a bit hunched over. Seeing this, I immediately started to panic, as I was not sure if this was a person, an animal, or whatever. As I was fumbling for the keys in the cup holder, I glanced in my side mirror and saw the same exact figure, motionless against the side of the car. A few seconds later, I started the car and punched it out of there. Where our car was parked, there was nothing visible from the light coming from the picnic awning. I'm not a huge believer in paranormal stuff, but this was an experience that I would 100% call my only real paranormal encounter. The size of whatever it was definitely not human, and although it was somewhat human, The amount of hair it had on its head made it hard to tell what it actually looked like. A friend that I met later in college from New Mexico who had lived on a reservation once suggested that it could have been a Wendigo or some other native folklore beast. I still don't know at all what it was for sure, but I still occasionally have nightmares about that night. When I was a kid, between the ages of 4 and 8, I would see a guy in my house. He would stand in the same spot in the same room looking at me, and my family couldn't see him. I'd cry and scream and would refuse to go near him, but nobody else ever saw him. I'm someone who believes in logic and the laws of the universe, so this really throws me off. I struggle to believe it myself, but I vividly remember this person, this ghost if you wish. Even now, I remember his face. I explained this to someone the other day and I felt so silly, I sounded like I was making it up. My daughter caught RSV at daycare this past week, and woke up crying for my wife the other night. I wake up again because I have a feeling someone is watching me, thinking my daughter has come in our room. I see my wife is still gone, and there's a shadowy little girl standing across the room staring at me. I say my daughter's name, no response. Just staring at me intently and silently. I roll out of bed and go in the bathroom and come back out and she's still there. I walk over to where she is and she disappears and moves to the other side of the room. At this point I have no idea if I'm hallucinating or what, so I crawl back into bed and do what I did as a kid if I was scared, cover myself all the way with my blanket and close my eyes. Wake up in the morning and tell my wife. She doesn't believe me and then says maybe it was the daughter we lost to a miscarriage. Pretty weird all in all. My family has a hunting cabin built around 1860 with a few acres attached. After I left the service in my mid-20s, my father, girlfriend, and I went down for a long weekend. Late at night, I woke up looking into the kitchen in total darkness except for a shitty night light that was slightly blocked by a young girl in a white dress. My mind didn't think ghost. I was just tired and wondering why a 5-ish-year-old girl was in the kitchen looking directly at me. Now this is where I stop and usually tell people, it's okay to not believe me, I totally understand. My girlfriend was sleeping next to me and my father in an adjacent room, not 5 feet away. I sat up, brought my feet to the floor, and took my eyes off her to shake myself awake, still in total doubt. When I looked back up to grab a second look to reassure myself, she was still standing there but 1 or 2 feet closer, 8 feet away, and as soon as it registered that this was absolutely not right, she vanished. Now, not like the movies, it was something different. She disappeared up into the right out of view, but in a way I can't explain. At this point, I'm wide awake and pushing myself back into the couch I was sleeping on. From around the corner where she went away, I saw a tall figure, completely pitch black, moving down that 10-foot hall I mentioned in my direction. It blocked the reflective light from the wall as it moved towards me. I yelled for my dad, like a little kid would. He grabbed the pull string from his light, and as soon as the light came on, it was gone. Now many occurrences have taken place here involving sightings of odd things in the woods outside, noises, and even things moving while we're gone, damn raccoons. So there is obviously that part that tells me, dude, you were sleeping. But this was nothing like I've ever felt or seen before, the fear, the smell, the heightened awareness in every detail. I had night terrors for the first 5 years of my life. Sometimes the dreams themselves wouldn't be scary, but in reality I would be screaming and crying while not being able to be woken up. One of the dreams was from when I was really young. Like, I still couldn't talk young. I remember all of them, specifically a reoccurring dream where it is nothing but my own consciousness observing what I can only describe as a geometric, mostly spherical shape. The shape is tied to my emotions, and the surface is constantly changing. It would periodically go from smooth to having what I could only describe as a ferrofluid-like texture while moving, and for some reason, when it became like that, it was absolutely terrifying. On top of this, I was being slingshot back and forth between perspectives. I can only describe it as if the sphere is the size of a planet and I'm floating in space, and then it would change size to, let's say, a tennis ball floating in space in front of me. The size of it wouldn't change, but the feeling of its scale would. Imagine you are an astronaut and you have a tennis ball. You float it in front of you, and from your perspective, it looks the same size as the Earth, but you know it isn't. For me, the sphere is both astronomically massive and small at the same time, and I'm constantly slingshotting between the two perspectives while the surface is changing, causing me to feel things based on how crazy the surface is. That is my best attempt to describe the cosmic horror my baby brain was exposed to. A few years ago, I was driving on the motorway by myself. It was a beautiful, clear, sunny day. Not a cloud in the sky. I was driving behind a semi, and there was a red car behind me. I looked down for a split second to adjust the volume on the stereo. When I looked up, A thick fog had rolled in, and the semi was on its side, sliding towards me so fast that I knew there was nothing I could do to avoid it. I absolutely knew with complete certainty that I was about to die. I was just overwhelmed by this deep devastation that I wouldn't get to see my daughter grow up. It was the most intense emotion I had ever felt in my life. By a landslide. I opened my mouth to scream or gasp or something, and I must have blinked because just like that, the semi was upright in the lane, driving normally, and there was no fog, the sun was out, no clouds, and the red car was still behind me. I wasn't on drugs or medication. I wasn't overtired, I have never hallucinated, and I was mentally and emotionally stable. It was so real. I remember the tendrils of fog being pushed out of the way by the sliding semi. I had to pull over and lose my shit because I'd just been about to die. I don't have a rational explanation. I've never experienced anything similar before or since. I know in my bones that what I experienced was real. I don't drive behind semis anymore, and I stay off the motorway on foggy days. When I was a teenager, I was big into urban exploration. One of my favorite spots was this abandoned boarding school that closed down in the late 80s. As far as I know, it didn't have a reputation as a paranormal hot spot, but one of the creepiest experiences I ever had was at that place. Now, I've seen some creepy shit before, but this one was off the charts. It was my third or fourth visit to this place, so I had the layout pretty well figured out. I was trying to locate this one building that I hadn't explored yet, but I couldn't find it. I knew perfectly well where it was, but it just wasn't there. It was very foggy that day, so I thought I got turned around in the fog, but then I noticed that none of the buildings were in the places I remember them being when I was there last. It gets weirder. Throughout the whole experience, I felt like I was being watched. I kept seeing movement out of the corner of my eye, and I kept hearing noises like talking or whispering. I just brushed it off as other explorers, since it was kind of a popular spot in my area and it's not unusual to see other people, but I never ran into anyone. In fact, I didn't even see or hear any of the usual animals, birds, squirrels, rabbits, the occasional deer, etc., that normally hang around there. I had this weird feeling that I was the only living soul in that place. Then I started to hear singing. This weird, ethereal sounding singing. I couldn't tell where it was coming from, but it got louder and louder until it just stopped. Then I heard the loudest, most ear-piercing, bloody murder-esque scream I've ever heard in my life. The kind of scream that made every hair on my body stand straight up. As soon as I heard it, I ran like hell out of there faster than I ever thought I could run. Adrenaline is a wonderful thing. I asked other explorers who've been to that particular place if they've encountered anything similar, but they told me they haven't. When I was around 13, I would sneak out in the middle of the night and take my mom's car and drive around. One night, as I was driving down a dark street, the car came to a sudden stop. It stopped so fast it threw my entire body forward. When I sat back up, the car was running and my foot was not on the brake. The car was not budging. I looked out the windshield and couldn't see anything. It was completely black. As I was trying to figure out what was going on, I started seeing intermittent lights as my eyes adjusted. I realized what I was seeing was a train flying by inches from the bumper of the car. I have no explanation and by all rights should have died that night. When I was a teen, my mother used to take me to bingo all the time. It was our thing. One night we had a friend of mine with us, and we were driving home. Small towns and backroads in southeast Missouri, back when cell phones were Nokia bricks and Google Maps didn't exist. We got lost about halfway home, as we often did, but my mom was a good navigator so we weren't too concerned. My friend asked what time it was, as they had a curfew. I vividly remember answering 8:42 after glancing at my watch, and my mom saying 8:45 after looking at the clock on the dash. I think the numbers stuck with me because we then discussed how one of the two was off by a few minutes. Right after that conversation ended, my mother found a road to turn around on, so she pulled in and we saw a metal arch with some cemetery name on it directly in front of us. Out of nowhere the car came to a stop and completely shut off. No dash lights, no nothing, and I swear the temperature dropped 10 degrees in an instant. She tried to start the car a couple times to no avail, then paused to light a cigarette, as she often did when she needed a minute to think or regroup. Right as she flicked her lighter, we all saw a big flash of light. Much brighter than that Bic could have produced. And then the car started, despite the fact that her hands were nowhere near the ignition. I suddenly had an absolutely horrible headache, and when I expressed as much they said they did too. We didn't think anything of it, other than it being a bit strange, and she began to back out of the cemetery road. About the time she got back on the main road, she looked down at the dash and said, "What the F?" So we looked to see what was wrong. The clock now read 11:17. Mind you, no less than 5 minutes had passed. I said that it was weird, but maybe the car shutting off had messed with it. I glanced down at my watch to confirm, only to find it now said 11:14. They were still 3 minutes apart, but nearly 2.5 hours had passed and we could not explain it. We kept talking it over and assumed we were just being paranoid. But when we got home, which was about 45 minutes from where we had gone to play bingo that night, it was indeed well after 11 p.m. I've never been able to explain it, and everybody assumes it's a made-up story, but I'll never forget it, and I'll never stop wondering where that time went. Years ago at me and my now partner's house in Chicago, I experienced something that I've never been able to explain. My partner was on a backpacking trip to South America, and had been gone over a month and was still a couple months away from returning. We usually rented out the extra bedrooms in the house, but less than a month before he was leaving for the trip, the 2 roommates upstairs had moved out and we had decided to leave them empty while he was out of town instead of trying to find more roommates on short notice, and also use the time to update the paint and pull the carpeting and refinish the wood floors underneath. Anyways, I had come home from work about 8 p.m. and decided I was going to take a shower and then get dressed up a little and go out to the bars to meet up some friends, as it was a Friday evening and I didn't have to work the next day. I take my shower, head into my bedroom, and start pulling on my clothes. My bedroom is on the garden level, which is like a walkout half basement common in Chicago bungalows, and my bed is up against the wall under the concrete steps that lead to the front door, which has a heavy wooden door and a very particular sounding Jimmy-proof deadbolt lock on it. I had been living there for 5 years and I was very familiar with the sounds of roommates coming and going through the door that was just above my bed. Anyways, I had just finished pulling on my underwear and stood up and was putting on my shirt, and I hear footsteps on the concrete stoop and then the extremely unmistakable sound of the deadbolt turning. I instantly freeze so I can hear better, thinking I'm out of my mind because I'm the only one living there at the moment, but I can definitely hear the door open and hear footsteps hit the wood floor in the entryway. So now I'm grabbing my aluminum softball bat I keep next to my bed and tiptoeing towards the stairs that go up to the main level, and I'm most definitely hearing footsteps crossing the same way right above me. As I get to the bottom of the stairs, I stop and am listening as hard as I can, and I hear definite footsteps heading right towards the top of the stairs. I decide duck it, and rush up the stairs in a second with my bat ready, and nothing. There's nobody there. I turn on all the lights and check all the rooms and windows and doors, and everything is locked and bolted. If someone had actually been there, it would have been impossible for them to exit the house before I could catch them and lock the door behind them. The creepiest part was we had literally changed the locks a week before my partner left, and I know the only other key that could open the doors was hiking through South America at the time. Needless to say, I went and crashed with a friend after the bars that night and went home in the day the next day.